All right, so here's part two, continuing to build our battle game. So in the last video, I walked you through creating your HTML structure with a series of divs and some inside of another, etc. We created some pictures, brought some images in, and here we've got our battle boss Vigar, we've got Mega Man, we've got our content area down here, and even the health bars. Now in the last video I wasn't able to find exactly the right property to make Mega Man align at the bottom. But I was able to, between videos, just refresh my memory on that. And to do that, I forgot there's another property called align items, and it can take the value baseline. Now when we do that, that allows all of the items to be aligned down near the bottom. Now because of this, we can get rid of this margin top, which really isn't a good way to align things at the bottom of something. Margins should only really be used to dictate how much space there is between items, not to make something be aligned to the bottom of another div. So now if I refresh, Mega Man is down at the bottom, but it also moved our health bars down, and this I don't necessarily like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the size, the height of our stats boxes, and that makes them really big, which is not exactly what I wanted. So if I change this to flex end, that's more what we wanted. Okay. So baseline, if we notice the difference between that, baseline moves everything to the bottom, and then when I applied the height, it just extends it even further. Obviously that's not really what we want. Instead, if I use the property flex end, that more gives us what we want, and the stats boxes, as I increase their height, kind of go up, and that's more kind of in line with where I'd want it. Okay, now I'm at a point where I want to start setting up the JavaScript, the code, to make our game actually work. Before we do that, I'd like to get rid of a lot of my borders. So I'm just going to get rid of those, get rid of that border and that border. Any others? Stats. There we go. HP border, I'm going to keep that because we want those borders to exist. There we go. Now this is starting to look a little bit better. I still don't have a background image, but maybe we can get that later on. Okay, so what do we want? So here, what I'm going to do, there's a number of different options that we can do. We could do a drop down, and so it you can give them a bunch of options of what move they want to do next, and they select it, and then you could have a button after that to activate the move. Or we could, a simpler option probably, is to have multiple buttons, one for each kind of move. So maybe let's try that. So I'm going to put them under here in the stats box. I'm going to have it below the health bar there. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to have another label, and I'll call it attacks, or maybe I'll do moves, because maybe we want to have defensive move as well. And there we go, like that. Now notice how there's no space hardly at all between that and health, and so I could either change this class. The nice thing is because I use this, kept the same class as health label, it still has the same font, and I like that. But maybe instead, maybe what I'll do is maybe I will keep that, but I will add some margin top to that. Okay, so now I'm going to add a button, and let's call this let's just do a blast. Okay, and to activate this, what I want it to do is have it so when you click the button, that activates a JavaScript function, which we haven't created yet, but I'm gonna put my trigger in anyways, and I'll call it blast. Okay, there we go, we've got blast. Now if I go back to health label, let's add margin, and if I put a dash top on that, that only adds a margin to the top. It doesn't add margin all around like just having margin does. And let's try 40 pixels, and let's see how that works. It's not really doing much. Okay, maybe I need to do padding top. Nope, it's still not giving us what we want. Maybe instead what I'll do is, let's try putting that inside of a paragraph tag. That's a little bit better. And then I can get rid of that and leave that blast. Oops. I still need a break tag in there. And there we go. That's a little bit better. So putting that inside of a paragraph tag gives us a bit of extra space. And now we're off to the races. Okay. Just before we continue with our JavaScript, let's also add in here .stats button. That way we can stylize our buttons a little bit as well, which is kind of nice. So let's make a static width. Well, maybe not actually. Let's go with let's go background color. Maybe I'll make it white. Let's give them a border of 3 pixels solid. Let's do a border color of black, and let's give them a font of maybe 24 point Arial. Let's try that. That's kind of cool. What we can also do is give rounded corners, which is kind of nice. Or we could do a completely rounded on the sides. To do that, we do border radius, and now we can give it a pixel value. How big of a radius do we want? So if I go 20 pixels, there we've got that. It looks a little bit funny though, because it's well, I think I want to make the font bolded, and we just need to make more space around it. To do that, this is where we want to add some padding, and so I'm going to give it a 15 pixels along the top, but on the sides I'm going to do a 25 pixels, so there's a bit more space on the sides. There we go. That's a little better. Maybe I'll lower the upper one. It seems a little chunkier, and let's widen it out even more. There, I kind of like that. I think that looks good. I want to make the border a little thicker. Now the other thing we can do is add a hover effect, so that when we hover over it, it changes color, which is pretty cool. So if I go stats button just like above, but I add a colon, hover, now we can add or change properties previously set, and they will only apply when the mouse is hovering over this element. And we can actually do a hover style for any element we want. So anything you can normally refer to in CSS, if you just add a colon hover, then those styles will only apply when you're hovering over that element. Pretty cool. So what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna flip the background color and the font color. So rather than the background color being white, I'm going to make it black, and then if I just change color, that's the color of the font, I'm going to make that white. All right, and there we go. Kind of cool. And then let's just make the font weight bold, and I feel like I want to make the text all caps. I don't really quite like them being all lowercase. There, that's looking better. Cool. But now, of course, it doesn't do anything. So let's do that. So we've got it calling the blast function. So now I'm going to go to script, and I'm going to define blast. Now there's a few different things we need to do. We need to think about here. So first of all, do we want the game just to start? Right now, the game is basically starting. There's no intro or anything like that. And sometimes you might want to have that happen, right? We might want to have, you know, rather than it show our health and moves and all of that right off the bat, maybe we want to have it where, you know, there's a button under here that says begin battle, and after that, that's when the health bars show, the moves show, and all of that. So we could try that. Okay. Here we go. So what we essentially want to have happen is have it so the stats are not visible at the beginning of the game. To do that, we're going to go to styles, go into our stats, and we're going to go visibility hidden. All right, so that means at the beginning of the game they're hidden. They still exist, they still take up space, but we just can't see them right now. Down here in our bottom row, which I defined right here, I'm going to do a text align as center so that we can have this centered like this. And now I'm going to add in on my HTML a button that's going to say begin battle kind of thing. On click, begin battle. All right, which means once we click it, it'll activate that function, and then we can have that function do whatever we need it to, like make the stats visible, etc. All right, so now if we do that, our buttons, it's not very stylish. What I would do in this case, you know how before we applied all of those styles to the button in stats to and it looks like this. I think what I would like to do now, because I want the same style to apply to moves and that initial button, is I'm going to change this to a class of button style like that, which means now on all my buttons I need to just add the class button style. That way any button with that class should have those same styles. There we go. I also need to change the hover dot button style. So now the hover has that as well. Now let's fill out our function begin battle. There we go. So when this happens, what do we want to have happen? Well, we want to have it so this text down here, it changes. We don't want it to say welcome to the battle arena. Now we want to say, you know, you are Mega Man. Well, it already says you're Mega Man facing off against boss Vigar. We want to give basic instructions like pick Mega Man's first move, you know, and then he can do that. So in order to do that, to change this text down here, we need to first be able to point to this div and then change the inner HTML of it. So that means we need to know what that div, what ID that div has. So that's bottom row. That means out here, before we even define our functions, we should be defining all our global variables pointing to the different divs we need reference to. So for instance, var bottom row, I like to keep the name the same, and then that's going to be equal to document.getElement by ID, because it's an ID of bottom row. Okay. What else do we need to be able to change? We need to be able to change the div for the Mega Man stats, right? And we also need to be able to change all the visibility of both stats boxes. So I'm going to go stats equals document.getElement. Now this one, because stats is actually a class, we're not using getElement by ID. We're going to be using getElements by class name. Stats. And then we're going to go megastats equals document.getElement by ID megastats. And I always like to just go back to my HTML and make sure, did I type that in right? Megastats, that's right. And it's got the class stats, beautiful. The other thing we're going to need is we're going to need to have variables pointing to the HP bar of both Mega Man and Vigar, so that we can shrink that health bar as they get damaged. And so we've got Mega Man HP. This is the one we want to shrink. We don't want to shrink the border. The border is going to stay that way. That way, as the HP bar shrinks, the HP border stays at whatever its original width is, and then you'll be able to visually see how much health they've lost. So we need to refer to Mega Man HP and Vig HP. So let's add in those variables as well. Var Mega HP. Oops. And Vig HP yeah. Now if I go back, so I've got Vig HP, beautiful, that's right. And did I do that one right as well? No, I didn't. There we go. Perfect. So now if I begin battle, first let's make the stats appear, because right now they're visible. They're invisible. So I want to change the visibility style. Now stats is a little bit different than changing the content of divs. With divs, we can, so like for instance bottom row, if we just want to change the content, then all we have to do is go inner HTML equals and then our new content. So pick Mega Man's first, Mega Man's ability by clicking the button above, something like that. Teaches them how to play. So that's pretty simple. Bottom row is a reference to a single item with an ID of bottom row, and we're changing the inner HTML to be new content. Okay, just to show that that works, click begin battle. Now we've got that text. But stats, that's actually returning more than one item. So we can't just change the inner HTML or even the style of it because it applies to multiple things. What we need to do now is do a for loop, and we can iterate through and change the style of each one. Now with stats, I'll show you two ways. One without a for loop, because we only actually have 2 items, and then another way with the for loop. So first, if we did it without the for loop, I could go stats 0, which would be the first element, probably Mega Man's, and I'm going to change style dot visibility equals visible. And that works. Now if we just did the same thing, stats1 dot style dot visibility, that, and make that equal to visible. Click, and now both of them are visible. Beautiful. Now if we did, let's say there was a number of items, we didn't know how many items had a specific class. Well, then we wouldn't know how many of these to put in. Stats actually exists as an array. And so what this is doing, 0 is the first item in the array. That means that we're changing the visibility style of the first item in the stats array to visible, and then 1 is actually the second item, and we're changing its visibility style to visible. Instead of that, the more general and generally better way of doing it would be to do a for loop. And for loop has 3 parameters, 3 sections in it. Var x equals 0. I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to have it loop as long as x is less than stats.length, which is the length of the stats array, x plus plus. So how is it changing through every iteration? It's increasing itself by 1. So for that, now I can do stats, and instead of a number, I can just put the variable x dot style dot visibility equals visible, and that means that the first time through x will equal 0. So it'll be effectively the same thing as what we had before. Stats 0 dot style dot visibility equals visible. Then it loops. X increases by 1 to 1, and then it's applying the same thing, but except it'd be stats 1 dot style dot visibility equals visible. And just to show that it works the same way, we click begin battle, and it applies the visibility to both. Okay. And now we're ready to play the game. So now we need to flesh out, what does blast do? All right, what do we want it to do? So if he chooses blast, well, there's a couple things. First of all, we need to decide how much damage is that going to do? Is it even going to hit? Maybe we want to have a possibility of him missing. Okay, so let's do that. All right, so let's say for this, maybe he has a 70% chance of hitting. How would we do that? Well, I'm going to make a variable, and I'm going to call it HitChance, and I make it equal to a random number. We can do random numbers, remember? So I'm going to do a math dot round, so it's rounded, math dot random, and then I'm going to multiply this by 10, let's say. Okay, now what would that give us? That'll actually give us a random number between 0 and 10. It's going to round down based on the, or up based on the normal rounding convention. So if it's less than 0.5, then it will round down. If it's greater than 0.5, or 0.5 exactly, it'll round up. And math.random times 10, that's going to give us that random number between 0 and 10. And but then we're going to round it after that so that we get the closest integer. Now that we've got that, I want to see if we hit. So basically I'm just going to go if hit chance is greater than or equal to 7. Actually, that would mean he has a 30% chance of hitting. I want to instead go as long as it's less than 7, because there's a greater chance that it will be less than or equal to 7, right? So if that's true, then that means it's gonna hit. You could conversely go, if it's greater than 3, then it's a hit, greater than or equal to 3, something like that. However you want to do it, either way, that's the same chance. Yeah. So if that's true, now I want to decide, all right, how much damage is it going to do? So I'm going to make a variable damage, and I make it equal to math.random times, and I'm thinking for the blast, I want it to be between, let's say, 10 and 20. Okay, so the difference between 10 and 20 is 10. There's a range of 10 there. So I'm going to multiply by 10. So right now, if I left it as it is, that'll just be a number between 0 and 10. But I want it to be between 10 and 20. So after that, I'm going to add 10 to it. That will give us a random number in the range of 10 to 20. Because if it was a 1, after we add 10, that'll make it 11. If it was a 9, that'll make it into a 19. Okay? Now that we've got the damage, we want to apply that damage to Vygar, right? And so we need to reduce his health, but we haven't actually defined his health yet. So let's define health variables. So let's make one mega HP. It has to be different than the one I had up here. If I use Mega Man HP right here, then I would lose my reference to the HP bar, right? So I got to make sure it's different. All right, so I can retain both. And I'm going to start off with a health of 100 var Vygar HP. Again, it needs to be different. And I'll make it 100 as well. So that, and notice that this code, it's not inside of a function. So this gets run right away the moment the game starts. Functions only get run when they're called. And right now I'm calling these functions when I click a button, right? So after I've created that damage, all right, now I'm going to reduce Vygar's health. So I'm going to go Vygar HP minus equals damage. Okay, so it was at 100. Now it's going to be whatever it was, whatever based on what damage was. Yeah. Now let's finish that up actually, and let's tell the user what happened. Let's populate that bottom box. So I've already got bottom row dot inner HTML equals you hit battle boss Vygar with your blast doing that much damage. Vygar now has Vygar HP. Okay, so now I'm changing that content to be what just happened. Okay, else, now this else means that the hit chance wasn't less than or equal to 7. It was higher than that. It was either an 8 or a 9 or a 10, which means it missed. So I just want to populate this with you missed. Okay, you can obviously be more descriptive if you want. Let's see if that works. Begin battle, blast. You hit him doing 14 damage. Now Vygar has 86, which makes sense because it should be 100 minus the damage. let's try it again. Oh, now he's 75, 64, and oh, and now I missed. Check that. 22, 7. Oh, I missed again. And now he's at -6. So notice there's a couple things here. First of all, we need to make it so that it doesn't let him go into the negatives. But also, notice our health bar hasn't changed. Well, have we told the health bar to change? No, we haven't. So we need to do that. We need to tell it to change. And so I want to do that right here. So let's go Vig HP. That's the box. That's his HP bar. Dot style. And what do we want to change? We want to change the width. Okay. Now what do we want to make the width equal to? Now you might think, well, let's just make it equal to Vigar HP. And that could work if the initial width of our HP bar was exactly 100. But I don't believe it was, right? Let's just see what happens when I do that. So if I click, oh, I missed, of course. All right, 88, 47, 58. See, it's not even doing anything. Now, the reason why also is because it's not enough to just give it a number. Remember, when we make the width of something, we have to specify the unit, and that should be pixels. Let's refresh, try that again. Oh my goodness, I'm missing like crazy. Okay, I just did 20 damage. Vigar's health is 80 HP, but look at the health bar. That's because that's 80 pixels. Well, that doesn't work. We want it to be relative to how big the HP bar is. So let's go back and let's see how big is that HP bar. 300 pixels. So when his health is at 100, we want that to be represented as 300 pixels. So you might think, well, one way you could do it is multiply by 3, possibly. That may not always give us what we want. We need to come up with a formula to determine the exact number of pixels it should be. Okay, so I'm going to make a new variable here. And I'm going to go var vig HP bar width. It might be a long name, but at least it's self-explanatory. This is going to equal, this is the variable that represents the width of the HP bar. So I want this to be equal to, now let's think about this. If his HP was 100, then if we plug that in, we should end up with 300 pixels, right? And as Vigar HP goes down, we want it to also change our pixels proportionally, right? So let's figure this out. So if Vigar if we made this equal to Vigar HP, which started out as 100, and we divide it by the total that his health is normally. So that would be 100. Okay. Now, what would that give us? So if Vigar HP was 100, what's 100 divided by 100? Well, that's 1. As Vigar HP goes down, so let's say it goes down to 80. What's 80 divided by 100? Well, that's 0.8. Okay. Now, if we took that and then multiplied by the maximum width of our HP bar, which was 300, that, I believe, should give us a good point of reference, a relative difference in width. So as that goes down, 0.8 times 300 will give us essentially 80% of 300. Vigar HP goes down to 70. 70 divided by 100 is 0.7 times 300 should give us 70% of 300. So rather than making the width equal to Vigar HP, let's change it to this new formula. And let's see if this looks right. So now we're here. We blast. He's now has 85 HP. That looks like about 85%, doesn't it? 73. Lovely. 60. That's a little more than half. 50. That looks almost exactly in half. So I think we've got a good formula here. Now, notice what happens. Once his HP is less than 0, it's a negative value, it's not actually changing this. And that's because that's a limit to CSS styles. You can't have something with a negative width, right? The lowest it can go is 0. So how do we account for that? Well, if we do this, and then we probably want to go have an if statement here. If Vigar HP is less than 0, then let's just set Vigar HP to 0. Yeah? And that should make sense. That should make it. So that if it goes below, we just bring it back up to 0 again. All right? Begin battle. Boom. Boom. And now he has 0 HP. Game over. Right? And at this point, we can actually do an if statement down here. And this is because this happens after he does a blast. If Vigar HP is equal to 0, then bottom row dot inner HTML, and I'm going to do a plus equals here, because that way we can add on to what's already there. And I still want to show how much damage I did last. And so you have successfully defeated Battle Boss Vigar. There we go. Boom. And notice this is right up next to it. I probably want this to be on the next line. When we do these inner HTMLs, we can actually put in there any other HTML tags we want to. It doesn't just have to be text. So I can put a break, a line break in there, and it will it'll apply that. There we go. But notice how if I keep on clicking, it keeps on doing damage and stuff. That doesn't really make sense. So all I'd have to do then, in this case, is I can put in a condition here where either I could put a condition where if Vigar's health is greater than 0, then do all of this. Another way, which I think is probably even better, is have it so that down here, if he's defeated, I make the buttons disappear where he can't click them anymore. Right? And I think that makes the most sense, so that you just don't have the possibility of doing any more attacks. Now to do this, I only wanted this to apply to this section here. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this an ID, this paragraph, mega moves, let's say, which means now var mega moves document.get element by ID mega moves. Mega moves dot style dot visibility equals hidden. And let's see if that works. Boom. And now I can't click it anymore. Even though it's still there, it's invisible and also making it unable to be clicked. So we're well on our way. We've got almost a full game. Obviously, one of the questions you're probably wondering is, what about Vigar? Doesn't he get to do any damage? Absolutely. And so in the next video, I'm going to show you how to add in Vygar's moves and start making it more of an actual game. All right. But thanks, guys, and hopefully that was helpful.